Am I wrong for telling my mom that I regret wasting my youth for her? I, 26F, was raised by a single mother. My mother always told me that my father had abandoned us and that he never loved us, and she always stressed that she had to work twice as hard to have a daughter. For some reason those comments always made me feel like everything was my fault, and sometimes I felt like my mother would have been better off if I didn't exist. When I turned 16, my mother was seriously ill, breast cancer. At that time, we were living in a rented house, and the owner had asked for it. At that moment, I found out that my mother had not paid the bills or the rent. Mom couldn't work, so I had to leave school and start working. The first year was hard. I ate very little. It was more coffee than anything. The chemo, the work, everything was very exhausting. Even so, I never regretted taking care of my mother. I felt like it was the least I could do after she sacrificed everything for me. After a while, my mother overcame cancer, and I decided to resume my mandatory studies. At first, my mother did not agree. She told me things like, "It is humiliating that you finish your studies when I was never able to do so, because I had to take care of you." At first, I thought his words made sense, but my boyfriend encouraged me to finish them. Now this last year, my boyfriend has encouraged me to go to university. He even told me that I could take out a loan to pay for university and put him as executor. He has a very good salary. When I raised the idea with my family, everyone was happy except my mother, who made me feel bad again. I told him that this was my decision, and I wanted to study because I wanted to get better opportunities. This time, my mother accused my boyfriend of putting absurd ideas in my head, that I was only going to get into debt in vain because I was no good for my studies, and I most likely left them halfway like I have done with everything in my life. I reminded her to never leave something abandoned of my own free will, but she reminded me that I left school because I was stupid. That's when I reminded her that I did it because she needed me. She said so many hurtful things at that moment. She told me that she never needed me, that I only extorted her, that she preferred to die before I took care of her. That's when I broke out and told her that I regretted having taken care of her all those years, and that I no longer wanted her in my life. My boyfriend says I was right to vent, but I feel like I was very cruel to her, and my family also thinks I was cruel. I don't know what to do. Maybe I should apologize. It's the only family I have, but I feel like I'm hurt a lot. Update: I have returned here to tell you a little about what has happened these months. After the fight with my mother, I decided to move in with my boyfriend. During the time I lived with my mother, I took care of the expenses, such as electricity, water, food, and rent. I told my mother that I would help her for 2 months while she looked for a job, and then she would have to fend for herself. But I decided to cut that agreement after finding out that she did a horrible thing. I talked to my partner about what I said here, and he agreed with some of your comments about my mom being a narcissist and that she had done something to make my father leave us. You were right. I tried to investigate. It was difficult since no one wanted to give me an answer. Until my mother's sister, who was a little interested, offered to take me to someone who might know about my father, in exchange for money. Finally, she contacted me with a sister of my father, and I was able to meet him. He was happy to hear from me. Our first conversation was via video call. I discovered that my father always paid money to my mother for me, and that he sent me gifts at Christmas and birthdays, gifts that my mother passed off as coming from her. I also found out that he is married, and I have a 16-year-old brother and an 8-year-old sister, and he also invited me to his wedding. When I asked him how he met my mother, he told me a pretty horrible story. They met on my father's sister's birthday. It should be noted that my mother was 20 and my father was 16. My mother got my father drunk and then they had sex. He doesn't remember much about that night, because he deleted that horrible memory from his mind. She became pregnant after that night. My maternal grandparents demanded that he marry my mother, but he disliked her. In the end, my paternal grandparents demanded a DNA test, and if I was his daughter, he would be financially responsible. But nothing more. He did get to know me, but he didn't want to marry my mother. He couldn't even see her. She harassed him and demanded a wedding. In the end, when I was 4 months old, my mother gave him an ultimatum: either marry her or forget about his daughter. He couldn't imagine being with a woman like that and told him that he would take care of me, but it couldn't be anything from her. My mother decided to leave the city and cut all ties with him until I was 1 year old and had a lot of debt. Then she told him that she would send him photographs of me in exchange for paying my expenses. He accepted, and for years he asked to see me, but he refused. He could only see me in photos. After talking, I understood the whole situation. I asked him if we could meet face to face. He accepted. I planned to visit him at his house, and thus meet his entire family. When I found out all this, I cut off all financial aid to my mother. She came to my house and demanded that I pay the bills. I told her that she had seen me with my father and that now I knew what kind of woman she was. That drove her crazy, and she tried to hit me, but my boyfriend quickly took her out of our house. I didn't see her again until the day I was going to travel to meet my father. She called me crying, saying that her cancer had come back. I thought for a few moments that she was telling me the truth, and I almost went to her house, but my boyfriend was smarter, and he told me that before believing him I should call the doctor who treated her before. I did exactly that and discovered that it wasn't true. I simply sent a message to my mom telling her not to come back to look for me, and I blocked her from everywhere. I finally met my father. We talked and cried a lot. His wife was very kind to me, and so were his children. He showed me all the photos he had of me and the letters he wrote to me, but she sent him back. I still don't know how to face all this. I just know that I don't want to see my mother again. Edit. I applied for some universities. I await a response. If everything goes well, I will study pedagogy, my dream since I was very little.